Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Malaz Majani from One Path Network. The global Muslim community is made up of more than 1.8 billion people around the world, and one of the most commonly discussed issues is the issue of unity. Even at a local level, and despite a lot of effort, it seems that unity is a difficult thing to achieve. Joining me in the studio today is a panel of Imams from all around Australia, from different backgrounds and different schools of thought. With us today is Sheikh Abu Bakr Zod, Sheikh Ahmed Abdo, Sheikh Shadi Sulaiman, Sheikh Omar Al-Banna, and Sheikh Arif Shakir. Welcome, Mashaykh. And thank you for joining us for the first Imams panel, where we hope to bring in Australian Imams from around the country to discuss topics that are important to the community. A good place to start our discussion is how we, as Imams, define the term unity. Sheikh Shadi, if I ask you, what does unity mean for you?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. Unity to me is that we agree on general matters as Muslims, the principles of Islam. And unity to me that we can't disagree as long as there's that mutual respect when it comes to that disagreement. So unity to me is that you have your opinion, I have my opinion, as long as I respect you, you respect me. Unity to me doesn't mean that we all have to be under one banner, even though in general we are under the banner of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. However, unity is that I respect you, you respect me. I don't backbite you, you don't backbite me. And we have that mutual respect that we share with one another, and we work on common issues that we as Muslim community share with one another. That's unity to me. Unity to me that we get together when there are issues that we all agree on, and we'll put our hands together and we'll put aside what we disagree on and move together. That's unity.
Sheikh Abu Bakr Zod, is this your same definition or do you have a different view?
So basically, unity Islamically, according to the research and my understanding, is to unite upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, according to the understanding of the Salaf rahimahumullah, the pious predecessors. Anyone who meets these three conditions in his belief, in his belief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angels, the prophets, the books, the last day,
Sheikh Abu Bakr,
and the hereafter.
Some people may not interpret these in the same way. So some people may have a different view of what the interpretation of the Quran or the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam may be.
Okay, so basically the three conditions that if they are met with the belief and the actions, then we unite with him wherever he is and whoever he is. And the differences, we're going to have to look at the priorities, what the Muslim community is going through, and we prioritize them. So if there's attacks on Islam, which that is what's rampant nowadays, then we've got to put these differences aside. We'll work with them in our own time, within the time of the Mashaykh, among the students of knowledge and the Mashaykh. And then we present unity as politically that we need to go be together, basically to show the unity of Muslims against the attacks on Islam. And so no.
Sheikh Ahmed, what criteria should Muslims have that define unity in Islam?
I think there are very, very clear definitions. For instance, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions to us the person who prays our prayer, who faces our direction of prayer, who eats our slaughtered animals, then he is under the covenant of Allah and His Messenger. We've got the famous hadith of Jibreel, that multi-tiered explanation of what our religion actually is and the beliefs that it entails. The 5 pillars of Islam, which we all agree upon, the 6 pillars of faith and Iman, which we all agree upon, belief in the unseen. And then we've got that third level, which is the level of ihsan, how we try and beautify our actions in exemplifying the legacy of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But what's quite interesting is then that fourth manifestation of the explanation of our Prophet ﷺ to Jibreel was the signs of the last day. And I think that's what's extremely relevant today, because that's where we're going to find so much diversity in approaches. How do we deal with all those variations in the world that we live in?
Sheikh Omar, this is a very broad and diverse community here in Australia. Do you think that the Muslim community in Australia is united?
Is the Muslim community in Australia united? In certain aspects, yes, of course. There is a level of unity that does exist in the community, and there is fields and areas where we would like to see more unity, is more cooperation. And there are issues that we are happy and we are content that we have achieved.
What are those areas?
So, for example, a big part of unity is love and respect of each other. A good relationship, putting aside certain aspects and cooperating in common goals and common targets. To a certain extent, many of the mashayikh in Australia, for example, many of the imams are quite united on that front. So maybe I would have a difference in opinion or different approach than another shaykh, But doesn't mean that we don't visit each other, doesn't mean that there's no love and cooperation and mutual respect and honor. You know, it does exist to a certain extent.
Do the Imams cooperate on common goals here in Australia?
Yes, of course, to a certain extent there is. There is, of course, unity and in cooperation on common targets and goals. Like Sheikh Abu Bakr mentioned earlier, Islam is under attack. So, of course, when big problems appear in the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, usually we tend to refocus on handling these matters than discussing or elaborating or in-depth talking about detailed issues that we might disagree upon.
Any examples of the cooperation that may happen or take place in Australia?
So, for example, there's many examples actually, but let's say, for example, the issue of violence, extremism that's we will find that existing now in many of the communities. You rarely find a sheikh or an imam who does not agree that this is something that has to be addressed, discussed. Issues of the youth and how they misinterpreting certain aspects of Islam. You'll find all the mashayikh of Australia, for example, we know and we have dealt with, they're all agreeing on the same matter. The issue of unity itself, that we need unity and we need cooperation, is something that the mashayikh do agree upon.
If the imams agree on a certain topic, does that necessarily mean that they are cooperating?
Of course, to a certain level, there will be cooperation when we agree on a target and we agree on an aspect. Then, of course, this means there's space and area for us to work together, to share efforts, to share ideas, concepts, have common programs that will, of course, achieve better goals and targets.
Fair enough. Sheikh Arif, I'd like to bring you in, and we all know that there has been many differences of opinion, throughout the history of Islam, even with some of the big scholars. What is the acceptable boundary of difference of opinion that maintains unity within a community?
I think it's that's an area that is easy to define, because the Islamic scholarship, may Allah have mercy upon them, they have really done a lot of effort, a lot of work in setting the framework of the Islamic jurisprudence and the Islamic Sharia in general. And therefore we notice that the ulama, they define the concept of ijma'. And whatever falls under the concept of ijma' is something that you cannot break away from. And therefore, whatever is within the scope of ijma', within the circle of ijma', then that's something that you have to accept, because all the ulama, they have agreed upon that.
So
However,
for the layperson, what does ijma' mean?
Ijma' is the agreement of the scholars of ijtihad in the Ummah of Muhammad on a ruling in relation to a particular matter after the namaz of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That is the definition of ijma'. So whatever the ulama and the mujtahideen, and some scholars of usul even include the entire ummah, whatever the entire ummah or the ulama of ijtihad have agreed upon the fact that it is a specific ruling that is set up and is accepted or not accepted, then that's something that you cannot break away from.
Is it the same thing as consensus or majority?
That's exactly what it is.
So it's a majority rule?
It's not a majority rule, but it's a consensus rule. And that's why the definition says it's the agreement of the scholars of ijtihad in a particular period of time, في عصر من العصور, okay, on a particular ruling after the namaz of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So really the term of ijma' is a very technical term. Is close, consensus is close to it, but it's very unique in itself, and that's why I quoted it as it is. Whatever falls under the category of ijma', then you cannot have division in it. However, whatever falls under the category of ijtihad, that is the way a person that is differing with me has differed with me after going through the legitimate process of ijtihad and being qualified to do so. So to simplify it, whatever the revelation, whatever the text, the Quran and the Sunnah allow in it a room for difference of opinion, then we have to accept that room that the Sharia allows.
Fair enough. Sheikh Shadi, your definition of the acceptable boundary for difference of opinion?
Well, as the Mashayikh had already implied, that there are general issues that we can't disagree over when it comes to Aqidah issues, when it comes to fiqh issues. We're talking about matters that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had made it very explicit and the scholars had agreed on. So these are the matters that we can't disagree on. And alhamdulillah, you find that the vast majority of Muslims around the world don't disagree over them. However, there are secondary matters that you find that sometimes we might disagree on. And not only secondary matters within the Sharia, but also political matters, like our political vision, our political views of matters. And that's where you find a lot of disagreement occurs, where how I deal with that particular matter. At the end of the day, there's room. If there's room and space for us to disagree, then we need to tolerate each other. If there's no room for us to disagree, then I understand the concept that we can't tolerate that disagreeable matter. So if there is a room for us to disagree, then we need to respect each other. If there's room for us to disagree, we need to tolerate each other. If there's room for us to disagree, we have to accept each other. And we have to start working towards understanding each other. But if there's no room to disagree, that's where we say, you know what, there's no room for us here to disagree. However, not everything that Imam knows or not everything that Imam understands, his own people are going to know and understand, because sometimes it becomes very hard for us to convey that message due to the environment that we're in. We interact with each other more. So obviously, a lot of the times we have the fear of the unknown. Why? Because I don't understand the other side, so I've got this wrong perception of the other side. However, Imams, because of their knowledge, because of their interaction, because of the nature of the work, they understand one another. So it's very important that the Imam takes responsibility of guiding his constituents or members, show his followers the right path, and at the same time, one of the issues that we've always spoken about, me as an Imam, I have to be in a position of leading, not to be led, because a lot of the times we are forced by our own people to do things or to act in a particular way. I believe it's wrong, but because of the pressure of me fearing that these people walk away from us. This is a very important message, that we lead, we teach, not to be led. Obviously we listen, we take an advice, we take nasiha, but it's very important that we show people the path, not to be imposed upon us.
Fair enough. Sheikh Omar, in talking about the acceptable boundary of difference of opinion, if someone doesn't believe in or subscribe to your views, or believes something that you're doing is an innovation, where do you draw the line, or how do you explain the difference of opinion there?
All right, so like the Mashayikh spoke before me and explained this matter, there are circles, you might as well, depict it as that or imagine it as that. There are circles of acceptance. There's extremism around us from every direction. So for example, some people, they believe that their interpretation of Islam and their understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah and the tradition of the predecessors, they close the circle so much it's actually choking him. It's only my way, it's only my understanding, it's only my view, and everyone else is wrong. And there's people, on the other hand, that are sort of, the circle is so wide, it opens up too much, it actually crosses the boundaries. Whereas, now Islam is a very, 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 volatile religion where there's nothing solid, there's no brick walls, as we can say, So it opens up too much. And in a sense now there's no foundations and no principles that we have to stick by. Really the middle way is somewhere in between. Like Sheikh Shadi said, there are aspects that are intolerable. We can't discuss them. They've been discussed before, they've been agreed upon before. All of us have to follow. And there are issues that even the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, the best of generations, the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, differed in. So what they differed in, and still Allah was pleased with them, we should have space to differ in these matters also.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Ahmed, if I may ask you, you've studied in Yemen, which is predominantly Ash'ari school of thought, and of course with us is Sheikh Abu Bakr, who studied in Medina, which may take the Salafi particular ideology or school of thought in terms of Aqidah. Do you ascribe yourself to these particular labels? Because this tends to be one of the things that drives and causes the causal factor of disunity within the Ummah.
I think it's important, Malaz, to understand our tradition, one which is very, very encompassing and unifying. There's an important qualification with regard to unity, and that is unity through our diversity. So it's not that we all need to agree on something, and whether it's the madhahib of fiqh, of jurisprudence, or the madhahib of aqidah in our tawheed, or even the madhahib in one's spiritual path to Allah, there's difference and diversity in those and different approaches. So for instance, how are we going to define Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Is it a group of people, or is it a particular sect, or is it a particular movement that subscribe to one or two imams in their interpretation? Or is it something that's all-encompassing of the majority of the ummah? Are we going to include both the Ash'ari and the Maturidi schools, as well as those who subscribe to a Salafi manhaj or methodology in its interpretation? It's about being inclusive, but knowing where to draw the line and to understand what is an acceptable difference of opinion and what's not an acceptable difference of opinion. And that's going to apply in our madhahib as well. So for instance, a person who is going to pray with their hands down, well, that's a perfectly valid opinion in one of the schools of jurisprudence. A person who is going to ensure that they are going to shorten their prayers whilst traveling as opposed to just joining them, again, a valid difference of opinion.
So this is good fiqh examples, jurisprudence. I want to bring it back with Sheikh Abu Bakr to the Aqidah divide that we have within the Ummah at the moment.
Yeah, so basically when we speak about the division of the Ummah when it comes to Aqidah matters, theology matters, we say that this it has existed way before our time, way before our community existed, this existed. It is no doubt that there was a Ash'ari school, Madrasat al-Ash'ariyah, and there was the Salafi school. And this is a fact, two facts that you need to mention. Number one is that each and both of these schools produced some great knowledge. It produced great scholars, teachers, and students. That's fact one. Fact two is that there has always been disagreement among the two schools of thought. There's always been disagreement in the matters of theology, aqidah, and methodology. And I believe the way that this should be combated, like how do we sort of fix this issue up among ourselves, is there's a very famous principle that is set by the ulama in where they say, نَتَعَاوَنُ فِيمَا اتَّفَقْنَا عَلَيْهِ, that we support, we help and encourage one another in things that we all agree to. So for example, we all agree to the honoring of the Quran. So when the Quran gets slammed and mocked and criticized, we all get up and speak about it and we all honor it. We all honor the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So then when that is being slammed and mocked and ridiculed, we all gotta get up and we sort of defend the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Another example is that all of us, we agree to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen shall be established and that the ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam should be implemented on earth. And we all work together to achieve this. And there's one more part of this principle in where they say, وَيَعْذُرُ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا فِي مَخْتَلَفْنَا. Let me just explain this. They say that we can forgive and excuse each other in things that we don't disagree among each other. But I don't agree to that statement. I think that the statement should be وَيَنْصَحُ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا فِي مَخْتَلَفْنَا عَلَيْهِ, that we shall advise one another in things that we disagree. So if I disagree with someone coming from the Ash'ari school of thought, then his right upon me is that I keep giving him nasiha with love, with respect, with care. I don't turn away from him and slam him and say this guy is on dalal and batil and he's misguided. That's not what a Muslim should do. I go to him and give him that nasiha.
Does this cooperation happen here in Australia at the moment?
Unfortunately,
or is this something that we need to work towards?
Yeah, so this is the thing. It's something that we're supposed to work towards. This is something that should be known among the mashayikh and the students of knowledge, the etiquette and the manners between how to sort of deal with our differences, how do we advise one another. Just giving a talk about the differences of opinion in an aqidah, giving it to the general masses, it'll create more damage than it creates any good. It'll create hatred, it'll create animosity, enmity, and that's all uncalled for. And when you look at the seerah of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, coming from the Hanbali school of thought, from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, he himself would say, اتسع صدري لمن خالفني, that my chest was open and it was wide open for those who disagreed with me. And he would used to say that كنت من أحرص الناس على تأليف القلوب على تأليف القلوب, that he would say I was the most person sort of put a lot of effort in bringing the people's hearts together, because at his time of course the Ash'ari and the Hanabila were going together head to head, and they used to hate each other and disrespect each other. And he would say, I was from the first and foremost people that would want to bring the people's hearts together, bring that love and brotherhood together. And of course that's the unity on the Islamic level. But when we speak of a political level, as we said at the beginning, when Islam is being attacked, you find that Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he lined up with people he refuted all his life, like the Sufis. Yes. He lined up with them to fight the Mongols and the Tatar. So this was something that did happen.
Bring in Sheikh Omar, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Bakr. Sheikh Omar, your views on this?
All right, so let me highlight a couple of points that are very, very interesting that Sheikh Bakr mentioned here, mashallah. I'd like to elaborate a bit on them. Number one, general phenomena that you really find, and I've touched this personally myself, is that usually mashayikh and scholars don't argue as much and differ as much as students and followers do. So at any level, you'll always find people with less knowledge and less understanding of the matters that we're actually differing about. You'll find that the general public are more emotional, less educated, and more violent in their difference of opinion, more than the mashayikh. We'll find across the world, mashayikh from different backgrounds and different groups. Yes, there is debate. Yes, there is argument. But most of the time, you will find this mutual respect. The problem is usually comes down to the, you know, the sort of the lower levels in terms of education. With them, it gets emotional. There's a lot of ta'assub. There's a lot of, extreme love and loyalty for the sheikh or the idea or the school. And they are the ones that usually cross the line and cross the boundary. This debate that you're discussing now regarding Salafis and Ash'aris, you know, we have to see the facts. It's been going on for close to 1,000 years or even more now. You know, we're talking about 10 centuries now. So any genius who comes out now in the ummah who thinks that, you know, I'm going to bring everyone to my way, I'm going to finish this fitna and I'm going to make everyone accept and agree with what I'm saying, you know, people that are much better than you, more educated, closer to Allah Azza wa Jal, did not succeed in this endeavor. So what Shaykh Abu Bakr said is very important. We should understand, yes, this is my aqidah, this is my belief, but there is common ground to work, there should be respect, there should be love, and I have to be honest, this usually does happen between the mashayikh. You know, majority of the mashayikh, regardless of their background, whether it's political background, national background, you know, race, color, ideology, usually we always get along very well. It's usually the lower, you know, the lesser educated people that, you know, face more of these problems.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Arif, so Sheikh Omar has explained that the Imams don't necessarily have this big conflict as such. What is the role of the Imams to actually educate the masses in regards to delving into such issues such as the Aqidah divide?
I think one of the problems here, Akhi, is that sometimes we have a failure in terms of strategizing our da'wah. The ulama, they teach you that when you learn, when you acquire knowledge, you go through maratib, you go through stages. And every person within a particular stage, he's allowed to discuss particular issues. You do this even with grammar, you do this with language. The same thing should apply to theology. There are particular issues that are not open for the public to discuss. They are qualified and specialized matters, and therefore they are to be discussed by specialized people. We do that with medicine, we do that even with all different types of trades. However, when it comes to religion, I think some of the ulama, they have compromised on this. And as a result, they opened up the door of issues which are very technical in their nature. And they opened them up to the public, and then they began to discuss them. And then these public people who do not have the qualifications, nor probably the mental capacity to deal with this issue, nor even the tarbiyah level that would allow them to stay within controlled measures. And as a result, people took the opportunity and went with it. So I believe that issues that are of controversial nature and are of specialized nature, they are to be discussed by those of specialty in the area. And Allah, again, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ.
Sheikh Shadi, I want to bring you in on this.
There's one thing that we all agree to, that everyone wants to see Islam prosper. Everyone wants to see Islam thrive. If we're not going to put our hands together, then we're not going to move forward. And I really compliment the Mashaykh for all the statements and comments that's just made. And let me just reiterate something they've always mentioned, especially nowadays, especially these days, we want others to tolerate us when we don't even tolerate each other. That's the issue that we've got. We want the outsiders, we want the non-Muslims, we want the Western countries, we want others to tolerate us as Muslims and accept us and embrace us and welcome us and deal with us with full tolerance and acceptance and understanding. But at the same time, we as Imams, we as Muslims, we as Ahl Sunnah, we are the ones who are in the boundary of Ahl Sunnah. Sometimes we don't even tolerate each other. And as the Mashaykh mentioned, I find that phenomenon not within the Mashaykh, but more within the students of the Mashaykh. But at the end of the day, me as a Shaykh, I'm also responsible for my students and for my members. I need to also convey that message to them and teach them and show them the path and tell people, look, there is space for us to disagree. You know, you could swim within that space. There's no need for you to go out of that space and start looking down at others, because at the end of the day, sometimes we do something that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has prohibited, and we put ourselves in a position of being a judge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only judge over our affairs, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only judge over what we do. So I shouldn't be putting myself in a position to judge this person, whether this person to be on the haqq or the batil. Yes, especially when there are issues where there's some space for us to work in. So alhamdulillah, a beautiful panel like this, in which I have to say we have some sort of platform of unity here in Australia, one of its kind. I haven't seen much of it overseas, especially in Western countries. Alhamdulillah, we have that here in Australia. The Mashayikh in Australia are a lot more tolerant to each other, a lot more understanding, a lot more united. They stand on those issues, they get together. You find in many different gatherings, mashayikh from different backgrounds are willing to sit down together, even though each one of them will come from the two extreme ends of the panel or two extreme ends of the platforms, and they are willing to sit down together and discuss those issues just for the sake of you and I have something in common, we need to work over it.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. There is a phenomena that we're all aware of people slandering imams and scholars on Facebook, on the social media, calling people sellouts, kuffar, munafiqeen, hypocrites, etc. Sheikh Ahmed, how do you think we can practically resolve this particular problem?
This is not only something I think that's connected to our own faith, but this is a worldwide phenomenon. We've got a rise of armchair critics, people who sit in the comfort of their own homes, within their air-conditioned rooms, and find that it's their God-given right to begin to label people of all different backgrounds and faiths. But our responsibility, first and foremost, is within our own community. And so, I always remember the advice of our Prophet ﷺ with regard to cautioning people in claiming others as being kuffar. That if this label doesn't in fact apply to that other person, that it's reflected back on them. We're a people who are very cautious of what we say. Imam al-Haddad, may Allah be pleased with him, said that the tongue is very, very small in size, but it's great in its consequences that it can in fact leave. So we've got to be a people who in fact watch what we say before we say. Imam Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, used to say, before I would utter any word, I would present it to the angel on my right and the angel on my left. So there's this type of muraqabah, this type of vigilance, knowing and observing that we're in fact being watched. Before we're being watched by cameras and human beings, we're being watched by Allah and His noble angels that are in fact scribing all of our deeds. So we need to in fact be reflective and go back to those principles of our faith.
Abu Bakr, does every single individual, every Muslim around the world have the right to go out and criticize other ideologies, other people, other mashayikh specifically?
Yeah, I think the most extreme, one of all in terms of criticism would be the takfir, labeling others kuffar and so on. And first and foremost, the idea of takfir is a noble thing in Islam. I mean, it wasn't something that was to be belittled, but how it's being used today and the way it goes on about today and the hands it's in and the people that do it and deliver it is being done in a very incorrect manner. And if you were to see the life of the Salaf, rahimahumullah, even if you were to look into the life of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, at the end of his life, he used to say, I did not make takfir of anyone who made wudu, because the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, وَلَا يُحَافِظُ عَلَى الْوُضُوءِ إِلَّا مُؤْمِنٌ. Right, and you find also Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari in his book, he'd say, فَإِنَّنَا لَا نُكَفِّرُ أَهْلَ الْقِبْلَةِ. Those who would face the Qibla, we never made takfir of them. For this is a very dangerous topic. I think when it comes to criticism, the most dangerous thing you could ever open your mouth with and say is to accuse another person of kufr. And this person, you know of him that he makes wudu, that he faces the Qibla, and these are ahadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that only a believer, a mu'min, is the one who would always be consistent in his wudu. This idea of criticism and making takfir and labels of people should be left to the people of knowledge, and it's after a long study that they do with such a person that things would, basically they'll come on a conclusion or a ruling about such a person. Wallahu.
So what is your advice for people on social media who take it on themselves, to police right and wrong and put people in such categories?
That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask you about him on the Day of Judgment. But Allah will ask you about, did you give him an advice or not? Right? So the thing is, you rush to give a ruling on such a person. He's an innovator, he's misguided, he's a kafir. You've never seen him in your life. You've never given him a nasiha in your life. You've never even just sat face to face with him to make sure that that's what he's upon, and to make him at least give, you hear about him, but you never hear from him, right? And so the advice is, before you rush to any of this, and if you think you're at that capacity and you have that knowledge, then that knowledge should have led you to go to him. The Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah are people who don't only have knowledge, but they also have insaf and adl, which is fairness and justice. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was above the list when it came to that. He wasn't only a man of knowledge, he was a man of justice and fairness as well. And so this is why he spent his entire life refuting and advising and writing in his books. And if you were to read his works, you see it like that. Nowadays, that doesn't exist. Just I heard something from him, one little thing, video, however this video was made or whatever it is, what I don't disregard the context. I don't care what it was said about, when it was said, how it was said. This guy is an innovator. He's a misguided 1, 2, 3, full stop, and it's set. People should be fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Sheikh Omar, other than the extreme case of takfir, criticizing mashayikh, people of knowledge, the ulama, people have spent their lives studying the books of knowledge and have sacrificed their entire life to bring people out from darkness into light. What's your advice on this particular issue?
All right, so of course, like Sheikh Ahmed said, this is not a phenomena that's only within the Muslim community, for example. It's a widespread thing around the world. A lot of people in their own comforts of their homes, they like accusing, abusing. It's very, very easy, especially now behind the keyboard, Before, people had to face up to someone, talk to him, face to face, which was harder. Now it's very, very easy to type something, send it on social media, or make a YouTube video, it goes viral, and you don't have to suffer the social even ramifications of it. But the advice in Islam is very, very, very clear. Like Sheikh Arif said, no one should speak about any of these matters except people with qualification. Islam is not just like this, anyone gives verdicts like that. أجرأكم على الفتوى أجرأكم على النار. Those of you who dare, give rulings and give verdicts, are the people who are basically, they have courage to taste the whole fire because there's no boundaries for them. It's a matter, you look sometimes, for example, a very, very detailed topic like issue of takfir or even issue of saying someone is an innovator or such. You find the big scholars of Islam historically, they used to sweat, take their time, refuse to answer, study the matter for years and years and years before they come up with a tiny little fatwa or a verdict. Nowadays, someone doesn't know how to read Fatiha properly. He doesn't know how to, read Arabic even. He hasn't studied anything before, attended a lecture here or two, or watched a video or two, and then he goes out and he starts giving rulings that, Umar ibn Khattab would have gathered all Sahaba to discuss the matter before we give a verdict on. So we say there's definitely carelessness. There's definitely lack of fear of Allah. My advice to these young men behind keyboards on social media is what was narrated by the many mashayikh and ulama, that backbiting is haram, it's a major sin in Islam, but worse than backbiting general people is backbiting scholars, because luhumul ulama masmuma. The flesh of scholars is poisoned flesh. It's not just any flesh, it's destructive for your deen, destructive for your iman. So you have to watch what you say, like Shaykh Ahmed said, and be very, very careful. There should be filters. If you really, really feel a need to advise someone, then go to someone that's knowledgeable and let them face up to this person, like Shaykh said, go advise him, go talk to him. But you just cowardly sending a message or making a video on YouTube, it just shows how weak you are and how ignorant you actually are.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Shadi, I want to present the next question to yourself. Some people on Facebook and within the community may say that the imams are out of touch. They don't know what's happening within the society, they don't know what's happening within the community, and at the moment you are the president of ANIC. Do you agree with this particular statement?
Look, I don't agree with it entirely. We as imams, we are like a group of different tradies trying to construct a beautiful building.
Allahu Akbar.
So you can't say that all the imams are with the youth. Some imams are with the youth, some imams are with the politicians, some imams are with the elderly generation, some imams with the Arabic speakers, some imams are with the intellectuals, some imams with the people on the ground, and we all complement each other. That's why we need that unity, because we need that complement. We need to complement each other and complete each other. I need you, you need me, he needs me, we all need each other. So the imams around this table will all need each other, we all perfect and complete each other.
Is there any of these tradies that are coming late to the site?
Look, some are, some aren't, some at the forefront, some at the back, some in the middle. Alhamdulillah, look, no one is perfect at the end of the day, and no one can claim perfection. We all have our flaws, we all have our shortcomings, our weaknesses. That's why we need unity, because we all complete each other. You see it from one angle, I'll see it from a different angle. You support me in one area, I'll support you in another area. You fill up the deficiency that I've got in my life, I'll fill up the deficiency that you've got, and we all complete each other.
Why do you think this particular perception is out there?
Because some imams are disconnected from the on-ground and the grassroots Muslim community. Yes, they are. But that doesn't mean they're not doing something else. Maybe because they're occupied with seeking knowledge, or even delivering knowledge, or even compiling knowledge. We need them. So just because someone is disconnected from the grassroots, it doesn't mean that he's not doing his job. Every imam is complementing one another. And some imams, I don't know, because as you mentioned, I've been heavily working with the imams, and each imam is working in a particular domain, in a particular area, that I need the imam there because I can't fill up that gap. He's filling up that gap, he's filling up that gap, and each one of us just fills up a different gap. We all need each other to complement each other. So he is doing something that I can't do. I'm doing something that he can't do. And that's why it's very important for us to look at each other. And that's also part of unity, that I'm not a threat to you, I'm a complement to you. And that's an issue that sometimes we might see one another, that I look at this sheikh or that sheikh is a threat to me. No, this sheikh is a compliment to me. Sheikh Arif is a compliment to me. Sheikh Umar is a compliment to me. Sheikh Abu Bakr is a compliment to me. Sheikh Ahmed is a compliment to me. And all of us are compliment to one another.
Is this a view that all the mashayikh share, or is this just your view?
I would say, if not all, 99% of them.
Okay, and further on to that, do you think that the fact that all the mashayikh are agreeing and complementing one another, is there a problem with scholarly leadership in Australia?
Look, sometimes yes, maybe due to some personalities. Sometimes, as I mentioned, going back to the point that I mentioned, that sometimes of the pressure that we might get from our members or students, they might push a particular direction that myself as a sheikh I'm not in agreement with, but because of the pressure that I receive. It's very important that we support those mashayikh and put them in a position of leadership and force that leadership, not for that to be enforced on them. And as the mashayikh mentioned before, a lot of that is stemming from young Muslims so enthusiastic about Islam, motivated, that are so sincere and passionate about Islam, but they've got the wrong direction. We need to redirect them and put them on the rails. We need to put them on the right track. And that's my responsibility and responsibility of the mashayikh. In Australia, as I mentioned, alhamdulillah, we have a one-of-a-kind community, and the mashayikh, alhamdulillah, most of them are together, most of them see the perception of complementing one another. Most of them try and support each other, consolidate efforts, understand each other, be together, because at the end of the day we are trying to overcome the differences that we have and say, you know what, whatever we disagree over, alhamdulillah, we have a lot more that we agree over that we can work together on.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Ahmed, I want to bring you in on this. Do you feel that each of the imams is just working on building his own fan base or fan club or his own students, and that there is no connection with the rest of the community, the wider community?
Malaz, can I bring in the example of a soccer game or a football game? One or two reasons. They say, related back to the previous discussion that we were talking about, they say play the ball, don't play the man.
And that's why you like soccer, that's why.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. You want to go for a match afterwards? So when we're talking about advising and criticizing, whether it be people of knowledge or otherwise, then we need to actually play the conversation. We tend to get personal in our attacks. So I've got no problem if someone comes and attacks me. But if it's going to be a personal attack, then it becomes an issue because it's no longer discussing the content. And with regard to the football match as well, it's a team. So if you've got a striker, for instance, that gets upset because the right-wing player is the one that scored the goal, then the coach is going to take him off the team, because he's not a team man, he's not a team player. And so in our ummah, whether it be people of scholarship, of ilm, of the ulama, of the mashayikh, or whether it be people on the civil ground going out and performing those great duties of supporting the homeless and the poor and the needy and combating domestic violence. Everyone's in fact playing their role. So we don't want everyone to do the same thing. Imagine if we had only engineers, if we only had teachers, if we only had accountants, our community wouldn't function.
But the question is each player juggling the ball on their own, or is there a common strategy that the entire team or the entire community is working towards?
Islam in Australia in its current form, compared to many other Western societies, is in fact quite young. If you look at, for instance, Islam in the South African tradition, it's much, much older. The infrastructure is much more well developed, particularly if you compare the Australian situation to Britain or to the US. With regard to strategies, I think we're at prime time at the moment with the coming together of imams and scholars under the umbrella of a federal body in the form of the National Imams Council, where there's actually regular conventions and meetings to be able to discuss those strategies. And one of the beautiful things is that people aren't excluded. So there will be youth advisory committees that will be brought on. There will be women that will be sought in terms of their opinion and their advice. And I think for the wider community, that openness to criticism, I'm sure Sheikh Shed will agree with me when he'll say he's open for criticism. So this discussion isn't about we don't want people to criticize, but to know what to criticize and when to criticize and how to criticize, because that's the only way we're actually going to be able to improve.
Do you see ANIC, or the Australian National Imams Council, as the peak body for imams in Australia?
I'm not here as the mouthpiece of ANIC, but the current situation is that it is. There is no other body in Australia that gathers the number of imams from every single state in a systematic membership like ANIC does. So by default, it is.
Sheikh Omar, in terms of a common strategy, how can we as a community, as a very large community with many different players, as the analogy that Sheikh Ahmed gave, how can we all work towards a common understanding, common objectives, common goals that we can all work towards?
All right, so like Sheikh Ahmed said, really the platform, alhamdulillah, does exist now. So ANIC does offer this opportunity of, of us to meet, engage and talk. Of course, more engagement, more talking, more meetings. We have to understand, it's very, very, very easy to speak about ideas. It's very, very hard to implement them on the ground, So for a young man behind the screen watching what's happening with the mashayikh in Australia, it's very, very easy to criticize, Demolishing is very easy. Building is very hard. To build an institution from scratch, considering that, a body like ANIC, for example, is independent completely from the government, funding, building an institution off the ground like this, raising it off the ground is not something easy. It might take years, it might take 10 years, 20 years to actually, be in the way or in the form that us as a community and us as mashayikh are happy and proud of. But it's a start, definitely a seed. So more of this engagement, more of panels like this, more of discussion should happen, more engagement should happen, so that we can, unify more on the issues that we can cooperate in. And there's a lot of issues that we all agree upon.
So ANIC has been around for a while. There is some criticism that not much progress have been made. What's your view in terms of the progress that the mashayikh have made? And
we all agree. Even the mashayikh of ANIC also all agree that it's not up to the level that we all wish it to be. But it's a seed. Some people prefer blocking, destroying, demolishing. Say, oh, no, it's not working, let's sack it. Instead of sacking it, brother, come, give us a hand of support, give us your advice. Like Sheikh Ahmed said, we're more than happy to hear criticism. Come and tell us what you think we should do to better ANIC, to make it stronger. If someone has a better idea than this platform, come up with the idea, but we want proactive, productive solutions. We don't want people to just, destructive criticism. Oh, it's bad, it's wrong, mashayikh will never unite, I'll go home. Brother, what are you doing? Where's the positivity?
Sheikh Arif, how do we bring positivity into allowing the masses, the general public, to be more active within community matters?
I think if they see us working together, then they'll work. One thing that you can never take away from the human nature is the need for leadership. We as humans, we are social beings, and we always aspire for leaders. And that's why the role of the prophets and messengers was not only to teach, but also to lead and to teach you how to lead. So by taking the ownership upon ourselves and realizing that the positions that we are in, they are first positions of accountability, and second, they are positions of leadership that will impact on the people that are under us. It will actually it will drive us to work to meet that particular responsibility, and therefore we will go outside the scope of our personal interests to the scope of the community interest. Once people see you doing it, then people will follow suit.
Sure.
So it begins with the leaders, and that's why the Rasul ﷺ, whenever he would address in his da'wah, he would address the general public, but also he would address the leaders of the tribes. He never took away from that. So you have to respect people's positions, you have to respect people's authorities, and then you have to work with them and persuade them to work with you, not enforce them. And once you do that, the whole tribe will follow.
SubhanAllah. On a different matter, we've recently seen an Imam get killed in New York. So there is a climate that we are living at the moment of Islamophobia and open criticism of Islam. How Sheikh Ahmed, if I may direct the question to yourself, how do you see, how do you rate the priority of unity at the moment in this particular climate that we are living in?
There's something in our tradition called fiqh al-awlawiyat, the fiqh of priorities, and I think that's right up on the top for us to get together in response to these mass occurrences and incidents that are affecting our global ummah on such a wide scale. There's no longer any time for our inner bickering, for those little petty differences that our ummah has had for centuries and centuries. They're there, they're established, and they're valid, and let's allow us to recognize them, acknowledge them. But there are greater challenges that are ahead of us. There are challenges that people are no longer seeing the truth of Islam. because of the way that it is being misrepresented. We have our own Muslim brothers and sisters that are being persecuted, tortured, not feeling safe to ride trains or buses or to go out in the street or to send their children to a local park to play on the slides and the rides. Why? Because they might be identified as being a person of Muslim faith. That's a challenge that we've got. How is it that we go to combat that? Is it through a re-education process? Is it through Muslims being first and foremost to offer their benevolent services to the wider community? When the Prophet ﷺ first entered Medina, Abdullah ibn Salam said, the first words that I heard from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was, Ayyuhan nas afshu salam, O people, spread peace. At'imu ta'am, give food to the people that don't have food to eat. Silul arham, extend kin relations. And so these are important aspects that I think we need to come together on, these benevolent services for our wider community.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Abu Bakr, we all know that we are all supposed to be proud of being Muslims. And in the current climate of Islamophobia, how important do you think unity is?
Of course. So when speaking about unity in such times that we live in, as you mentioned earlier, that Imam is being attacked and killed, and before that, Masajid being burnt, and as Sheikh Ahmed mentioned here, that people aren't feeling safe in the streets anymore, in the shoppings, in the parks, and whatever it is, then most definitely there are disagreements among each other. Yes, we already acknowledge that. That's a fact, and it's existed long before you existed. But during these times when Islam is attacked, the way it is being attacked, and it only gets worse, doesn't get better, then these differences that we have, whether the aqaid, the theology and the methodology differences we have, they will still remain, and they're always there to remain. And they're always there. So what he believes and what I believe might be two different things, and I'll never probably agree with him, and I'll keep advising him. But when Islam is attacked, then we need to all stand together as one line, because if I was to stand alone, I'm going to be weak and I'll be destroyed. And if he was to stand alone, he'll be weak and he'll be destroyed. And if we stood all together, then that becomes like, this is the force that needs to be against those that attack us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. He said that don't basically separate, don't divide. What happens as a result? تَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. It's really beautiful tafsir of رِيحُكُمْ. The word رِيحُكُمْ, it means wind. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He spoke about the believers coming together, standing in line to defend Islam as a rih, as a wind. But when it's shattered, then everyone is on his own, and a breeze from here and a breeze from here and a breeze from there doesn't really do anything. So this is why I just reiterate that point that I mentioned at the beginning, which was the story of Ibn Taymiyyah radiyallahu anhu wa rahimahu, just so we can make it clear that even though he had differences with the extreme of the Sufis, and he never agreed with them, and he remained most of his life in refutation and writing books and books about them, but when he was faced by an enemy, which were the Mongols and the Tatar, that was an enemy, that was a common enemy that was attacking Islam, he found it most right to stand with his own enemies that he used to refute so many times. He stood with them to attack them because Islam was under the attack. And then when things got better, when Islam wasn't under attack, it wasn't in such pressure, then there was time to open up the differences, to sit with each other and to discuss these issues. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh, you've mentioned Sufis twice. Are you able to elaborate on exactly what you mean by Sufis?
Yeah, so I basically, when we spoke about the Sufis, we're speaking about the most extreme of them. Of course, in every sect there exists an extreme version. And the Sufis that I was mentioning were the Sufis that basically the ones that would walk into the fire and the magic and they stab themselves and worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the likes, for example, of Ibn Arabi, of Ibn al-Farid, who used to say that I would see Allah, like the fact of al-Hallaj, who used to say, I am Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This type of Sufism is no doubt kufr. It's not even accepted among the moderate Sufis that exist nowadays. And so this is basically those that adopted basically the belief of al-Ittihad, meaning they saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything. That is the extreme sect. These are people who, when we speak about, this is it's not a praised type of Sufism. There is a praised type of Sufism, and that's it has its different meanings according to what you want to explain it or define it as being.
Ahmed, if I may bring you in at this point.
If we can look at, for example, the people of Tasawwuf or Sufism as being first and foremost a reflection of the essential elements of Ihsan. There have been people throughout the ages who have made certain claims or had certain allegiances or affiliations to various schools of thought, whether it be the school of Tasawwuf or the school of the Salafi manhaj, and various other schools that have misrepresented those particular schools. So when we're talking about Tasawwuf that is accepted, we're talking about a Sufism that is accepted by the Quran, according to its principles, according to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and as well the understanding of the righteous predecessors, which Sheikh Abu Bakr himself had mentioned. So I don't think there's any disagreement on that.
Sheikh Sharif, if I may actually ask you the question regarding to some practical steps that the Imams can undertake to achieve unity within the community.
Yeah, practical steps. Number one, we need to get together with one another to understand each other, because a lot of the times, because we are distant from one another, sometimes we start having this wrong perception of each other. So it's very important that we get together, share different platforms, talk to one another, share ideas, share different thoughts. That will start breaking down the barriers that we've created. And I do say and reiterate, we've created those barriers. We need to have the bridges with one another, not create barriers. And as I mentioned before, sometimes we have that fear of the unknown because we've created barriers between one another because we don't know each other. So it's very important that we get together. And you've mentioned before, ANIC, Australian National Imams Council, is a platform that brings the Mashaykh together from across Australia, from different backgrounds, different school of thoughts, different ethnicities. We get together and we discuss those issues. And at least if we disagree, at least we disagree when we know each other and we've got this open line of communication that we can discuss. That's number one, which is a very important one. We need to get together. We need to communicate with one another. Number two, we need to start understanding each other on those issues that we disagree. Maybe I'm disagreeing with a particular issue because I don't understand your concept of it. I don't understand your perception of it. It's very important that we educate ourselves, because a lot of the times as students of knowledge, we only look at things from one side. We don't look at it from the other side. How many times we sat down and because I was adamant on a particular opinion, but then when I heard the other opinion, then I understood it. So sometimes there is that lack of knowledge in a particular area from the mashayikh themselves, especially growing up or going to a particular school of thought or in a particular institution. You've only heard one side. It's very important that you hear the other side, and that is apparent amongst the mashayikh. So these are the two most important ones. And again, when we start leading by a good example, I believe everyone will follow suit.
Sheikh Arif, do you agree with Sheikh Sharif's point of view?
Yeah, of course I do. But there's something I think that probably I would like to revisit, which is that unity and differences of opinion, they're not opposites of each other. All right. I believe part of the definition of unity is to succeed to coexist with one another despite our differences. And if we have a quick review over Islam from the time of the Rasul ﷺ until today, you'll notice that the differences amongst the scholars have always existed. But these differences have never stopped the scholars and the leadership, both of them, from working towards the common goals of that would lead to the benefit of the Ummah and the benefit of the Muslims. So, and unity is not something that we can choose. Unity is set within Islam. Our book is one, our Sharia is one, our Rasul ﷺ is one, and our vision also is one. So therefore, it's not that we choose unity. We live unity, but we sometimes weaken in our own practices. And therefore, what we need to do is to wake up to the real definition of unity. That is, unity is for us to cooperate and to coexist despite our differences and to work towards our unified vision, which is the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the spread of religion of Allah, and to have a constructive law on the face of this earth, and to work towards the goals that would benefit our ummah. And as long as we are true Muslims and true scholars, then there should be no problems in doing that.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Omar, what are some practical steps for the community to be able to achieve unity?
Like mashallah, all mashayikh have said, I reckon engagement, discussion, cooperation, even social interaction, I reckon is very, very important on a social level.
So do you mean that by that the community must have some sort of reference point, a contact with the Sheikh's
Definitely,
phone number?
Very, very, very important. But I think a point that needs to, go out there is this. Mashayikh, imams are not aliens. We're not from outer space, We're human beings, we have mistakes, we have normal lives. Many of us have jobs other than being the imam or the scholar. Many of us work part-time, we have families, we have children. We're not untouchable. It's very, very easy. Instead of abusing me on the internet, abusing me on Facebook, come and see me. Most of the time, when the person that's upset with a certain sheikh or with imams comes and actually sits with them, he understands that, the depth of the problem that he's facing. It's when you have the interaction. And I say to people, in Islam, there's no priesthood. You know, like maybe other religions, for example, there's something called the priest, a holy man or a godly man, and there's the public people. In Islam, we're all working, we should be all working as Muslims towards the same goal, you know? So instead of sort of breaking what's existing and stopping the work, the good that's happening, try and be proactive and cooperative. So it's very, very easy to talk, very hard to walk the walk, as we say. So I can, for example, I wasn't born a sheikh. People are not born scholars and mashayikh and imams, you know. You have to go for a lot of hard work, a lot of studying. If someone feels that he has an addition or something should happen, maybe instead of verbally criticizing, maybe you should sort of, you know, take the steps, learn. Now there's, mashallah, institutions in Australia that will teach, teach Islam, learn, memorize the Quran, so that you can become proactive and give good advice, rather than sitting behind the keyboard and, you know, sort of insult and ridicule and humiliate.
I like your description of Mashaykh as aliens. You know, that's true. Sometimes people look at us in that way, and people need to understand that we're not perfect people. At the end of the day, we're human beings like everyone else.
So what's your advice for the community to be able to assist and work together on bringing unity about for us in Australia?
As the Mashaykh mentioned, I think education is number one. It's very important that we educate ourselves and know better, so we could understand the other views, the opposing views that we see, or we might perceive ourselves to start believing that there is an opposing view. It's very important for me to educate myself, engage, and reach out to the Mashaykh, discuss it, talk to them. Maybe that's another shortcoming from our end. We Mashaykh need to reach out more to people and give that avenue and platform for people to come and talk to us. So engaging. We need to talk to one another, speak to one another. We need to sit down and that. And education is very important. At the end of the day, we need to come to the understanding that yes, we are going to have differences of opinions, but we need to work together.
Sheikh Ahmed, other than dialogue and education, what practical steps can you advise to the community?
We need representation from different cultures and ethnicities, from different languages that are being spoken. So for instance, here on our panel, we've predominantly got Arab-speaking background shuyukh.
We have to have different, more diverse imams on future panels.
And I think that's really important, because that's going to be indicative of the diversity of our Islamic scholarship within Australia. So we've got scholars from the sub-Indian continent, we've got scholars from Indonesia, we've got scholars from Africa, scholars from Europe and Turkey. That's extremely important that people of scholarship, as well as the lay people themselves, interact with one another. When Muslims first settled in these areas, they settled based on their ethnicities and the languages that were spoken. Now we're seeing a very much cross-pollination of different cultures. So for instance, some of the center focal points of Muslim settlement is no longer one particular demographic. It's very much changing. Our centers, our mosques, our masajids, our Islamic centers need to move away from these labels of being language-based or being ethnic-based, because our community, our ummah, is one which the Prophet ﷺ accepted Salman al-Farisi, and he accepted Suhaib al-Rumi and Bilal al-Habashi, all these different Sahaba from different parts of the world. We've also got a challenge amongst us and ahead of us, and that is, how do we ensure that we capture all elements of our society? So for instance, women might feel, well, I'm not represented here in this panel. Who's going to voice my particular issues? So when we're talking about unity, we need to be very much observant of how is it that we're going to represent the issues in our society. We've also got, I think, the importance of having cross-school visits. So if we have schools, centers, mosques, or various other organizations that are from one particular understanding of our Islamic scholarship, that we have cross-school visits. So we take groups of people from one center to the other. Just like we've got interfaith events, we also need to have intrafaith events. And that means visits from within different parts of our ummah and our faith community, and also the design of our centers and our mosques, which we're seeing very much nowadays, is much more accessible, much more open. It's no longer just a mosque, but it's a film studio. It's a portal for the distribution of food for homeless people. All these different functions of our Islamic centers need to be, I think, devised well.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Abu Bakr, some final thoughts on bringing unity in about the community?
Very simple. We just work with each other on what we agree to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى, that help, encourage, support one another when it comes to good and righteousness. And the things that we disagree upon, we're not saying close the door on them or put them under the rug or along the lines. Rather, ننصح فيما بيننا. So we'll discuss them, we'll give advice to one another with that love, with that respect, with that concern for one another. And if that's something that's going to stir issues with others, then the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, Man somata naja, whoever remains silent, يعني basically he's been saved. Sometimes there's they call it in Arabic siyasat al-sukut, meaning the politics of silence. So most definitely, there are sometimes when you open your mouth and speak about issues, it's not always that you're going to rectify things, maybe make things worse. But most definitely, if you kept quiet, then if you didn't make things better, at least you'll never make them worse. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Ahmed, some 30-second final thoughts.
Unity is something that's affecting every single element of our society. But I think that if we are unable to find that unity in our relationship with our Creator, with Allah, that tuma'nina, that tranquility, that serenity in our own individual lives, we're talking about unity in this broad ummah aspect within this land, within this country, in this world. But what about the unity in our homes? A lot of the time, we've got dysfunctional families. We've got fathers and sons that no longer talk to one another. We've got mothers and fathers that are arguing with one another. We've got homes that are now dysfunctional. We need to bring that unity back in our homes, back in our individual lives. And I think a natural progression from that reintroduction of unity within our homes is going to permeate to the rest of our society and our discussions.
Sheikh Shadi, final thoughts.
Well, I have to say, and this is an advice to myself, to the mashayikh and imams, and to the rest of the Muslim community, we need to understand that unity is no longer an option, it is an obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made mention in the Quran al-Kareem. It is an obligation upon me, an obligation upon everyone. We need to come out of our comfort zone, we need to come out of our own personal interests, and we need to do and strive towards unity, no matter what the case is, especially these days in which Islam is under continuous and constant attacks. We need to unite with one another. We need to bring our hands together. We need to bring our thoughts together. We need to consolidate our efforts. We need to work together and cooperate together. So unity to me is no longer an option. It is an obligation. When I look at it as an obligation, I'll do anything and whatever it takes for me to unite with my brothers and my sisters.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Omar, your thoughts?
All right, so I'm usually accused of being negative. Sometimes I'll be very, very positive in my comments with you, Amelez. I'd say, first of all, we have to understand the challenge that's ahead of us. All right, so we all agree, like I'm sure you've heard in all this panel and outside, that unity is a must. It's something we have to work towards. It's not easy to unite all the hearts, but it's something that we all have to cooperate, make dua for each other, supplicate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask Him for His help. Without Allah's help, we will never reach our targets. So anyone who's watching this, anyone who is really concerned about the ummah, instead of maybe being negative, maybe try and make dua for the mashayikh, the scholars, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite the hearts and make ta'leef between the hearts. On another note, I would like to say that I think the mashayikh of Australia do deserve a pat on the shoulders, because if you look at the challenge, we actually have a harder job than many Muslim majority countries. In any Muslim majority country like Egypt and Saudi, you still find this unity, whereas the language is the same, the culture is the same, the backgrounds are the same, and still there's, a sort of an element of this unity. Here you're dealing with, hundreds of nationalities, hundreds of backgrounds, different languages, different cultures, different approaches, different understanding. Other than the general difference of opinion and schools of thought, you're actually dealing also with cultural matters, linguistic matters, aspects that, you get to know different people. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I think we're actually doing very, very good compared to other countries in the world. But I would like to highlight and emphasize that I think one of the most beneficial steps that we can take as mashayikh is that we should invite each other to our centers. All right? So like you said, a lot of mashayikh are sort of soul players, he's working in his mosque, he's doing a great job in his field where he is, but the interaction is missing. Other than the platform of Anik, we should actually have better engagement. Families should visit, and I invite the sheikh to my house, get to talk to him, get to know him. These things will break a lot of the sort of, a lot of the prejudices or the thoughts that you've heard about this person. Most of the time when you talk to the person and hear it straight from him, straight ahead from him what his opinions are, you actually tend to agree. When you hear from outside, Chinese whispers, we all know what happens, So more interaction, more social interaction, more love, more dua at night for each other. Inshallah, we'll all reach our target. That's as positive as I can give you.
Jazakallah khair. Sheikh Arif, your final thoughts?
I think probably two or three main dot points. You cannot have unity without having mercy. You cannot, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the issue is not just about leadership and knowledge. فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. Okay, if we want to unite each other, then we have to have mercy upon each other. And you cannot have mercy, we cannot have unity without having patience. Bringing people together is not an easy task, so you cannot easily give up on it. You have to be patient and you have to endure if you want to achieve it. And third, I think we have to be realistic as well. We cannot live in our ideal world and expect everything to happen as it is. And therefore, we should begin from the ground. And therefore, cooperation is something that is key. We may not be able to unify everyone in our vision, in our practical vision, but if we cooperate with each other, then we actually can achieve unity as long as mercy is there and patience is there and sincerity is there. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Arif. That's all the time that we have for today. I would like to thank Sheikh Abu Bakr Zod, Sheikh Ahmed Abdo, Sheikh Shadi Sulaiman, Sheikh Amr al-Banna and Sheikh Arif Shakir. And we look forward to having you and other Australian Imams for future discussions on this panel. And thank you for watching. If you have any ideas or comments, do let us know your thoughts. And until next time, stay united. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
One Path Network.